Imagine, for just a second, standing completely alone in the center of a stage.
Oh, man. Just thinking about it makes my palms sweat.
Right. There is literally just a microphone stand in front of you. And beyond the blinding glare of the stage lights, there are 1,200 people sitting in the dark.
And they're all just staring directly at you.
Staring right at you. They paid good money. They hired babysitters. They drove through all that terrible traffic.
Yeah, they're sitting there with their arms crossed, just waiting for you to entertain them.
Exactly. And the pressure of that expectation is so intensely heavy, you know? The biological fear of standing alone in front of a crowd is just so overwhelming that your vision literally starts to tunnel.
Like a literal physical reaction to the stress.
Yeah, the blood leaves your extremities, your heart rate spikes to like 180 beats per minute, and you just black out from sheer unadulterated terror.
It is a profoundly visceral image, honestly. I mean, you are describing a human body reacting exactly as if it is about to be physically torn apart and eaten alive.
Right. Even though there's no actual physical danger in the room.
Right. None at all.
So now, I want you listening to contrast that specific type of modern psychological anxiety with a completely different kind of extreme scenario.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine willingly walking into a locked steel cage, barefoot, wearing nothing but shorts, to fight a highly trained killer who has spent the last 18 weeks specifically preparing to dismantle you joint by joint.
There's just a whole different level of crazy.
Or taking it even further away from civilization, imagine tracking a 1,600-pound grizzly bear deep in the remote freezing wilderness of Alaska.
You know, an apex predator with paws the exact size of a human torso.
Yes. So you're laying out three completely different environments here.
You got the brightly lit comedy stage, the bloody canvas of the octagon, and the frozen dirt of the wild.
Exactly. But from a psychological standpoint, they all demand the exact same thing.
Which is a total surrender to extreme pressure.
Yeah.
And like a willingness to step entirely outside the safety of modern comforts.
And that is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring a truly fascinating conversation.
Yeah, it's drawn from this massive, really wide-ranging discussion between an actor and musician and a veteran comedian who also happens to be a longtime UFC commentator.
We're going to use their combined experiences to dissect what it really takes to master a craft. We'll look at the absolute biological necessity of crushing failure.
The evolution of human combat, too.
Right. And why rewilding ourselves in raw nature might be, honestly, the only real antidote we have left to survive this digital age.
It is a remarkable set of sources, precisely because it bridges the gap between these seemingly unrelated worlds.
It really does. What they reveal is that the psychology required to survive a hostile comedy club crowd isn't fundamentally different from the psychology required to survive a chokehold.
Or a frozen mountain range, for that matter. It is all about how humans process and ultimately conquer.
And for you listening right now, whether you are sitting in traffic trying to figure out how to master a new skill late in life, or feeling the heavy crush of imposter syndrome at your corporate job.
Which so many of us do.
Oh, constantly. Or, honestly, if you are just feeling completely overwhelmed by the constant digital noise of your smartphone, this deep dive is going to unpack the exact mindset required to navigate all of it.
I am so ready for this.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the obsessive drive to create, and this fascinating concept brought up in the discussion called escaping the velvet prison.
To really understand where this obsessive drive comes from, the discussion points us to a massive modern anomaly in the entertainment industry.
Oh, you're talking about Taylor Sheridan, right?
Exactly. The creator of the Yellowstone television universe. What makes his story so compelling as a case study for drive is his delayed trajectory.
Yeah, he was not some 22-year-old Hollywood prodigy who had the whole industry figured out from day one.
Not at all. For a massive chunk of his adult life, he was essentially scrambling. He was trying to make it as a working actor, taking really small parts, and struggling financially until he was almost 40 years old.
Hey, I really want to pause on that because it's so important for people to hear. He was scraping by until he was 40.
It's a classic, gritty, real-life rags to riches story.
It really is. He knew exactly what it was like to be poor, to stress about rent, to barely make it in a city that constantly rejects you. And then the ultimate pressure cooker arrives.
He has a kid on the way.
Right. But the underlying argument here is that this relentless superhuman drive is directly fueled by that earlier desperation, right?
Exactly. It's a specific psychological mechanism. When you spend 2 decades intimately knowing what the bottom looks like, and you finally catch traction, your brain essentially refuses to let you take your foot off the gas.
The fear of going backwards becomes the ultimate fuel source. I love the analogy they use to put this into perspective.
The directing analogy.
Yeah. It's one thing to direct a single, standalone masterpiece. Imagine someone comes up to you and asks, could you direct a movie as good as Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven?
You might think about it and say, okay, if I dedicate 5 years of my life to this one script,
If I study the craft obsessively, if I pour every single ounce of my soul and mental bandwidth into that one single 2-hour project, maybe I could approach that level of greatness.
but to write 10 television shows at once, that defies the normal parameters of human energy.
It's mathematically impossible for a normal brain to compartmentalize that many characters and storylines without short-circuiting.
Which naturally brings up a vital question about time management. If you are going to operate at a Taylor-Sheridan level of output, how do you protect your time?
And this leads to a highly entertaining but deeply insightful subtopic in the source material regarding the culture of golf.
Oh man, the golf tangent is hilarious, but it makes so much sense when you break it down.
The ultimate conclusion they reach is that if you want to achieve actual greatness in your chosen field, the moral of the story is do not play golf.
They literally frame golf as the ultimate insurmountable time sink. Let's look at the mechanics of the game.
The commitment required just to become functionally decent is massive.
Functionally decent, meaning you can hit the ball consistently enough that the experience isn't just pure misery. You cannot just dabble in golf.
No, you are looking at a minimum 6-hour commitment per outing when you factor in the drive, the warm-up, the 18 holes, and the social decompression afterward.
Add to that the mandatory lessons, the driving range sessions, the indoor simulator time. If you possess an addictive personality,
Which almost all highly driven creators and athletes do.
right, golf will act like a parasite. It will consume the exact mental bandwidth and temporal space that you desperately need to allocate to your actual craft.
They point out this incredible irony that basically every American president seems culturally required to play it.
They specifically mention Donald Trump's well-known obsessive golfing habits. It's treated almost like a prerequisite for high-level business or political office.
It's this weird, unspoken businessman ritual. You get out on a perfectly manicured lawn, you ride around in a cart, you have a few cocktails, talk a little trash, and you allegedly make these massive deals.
But for someone obsessively trying to build a creative empire from scratch,
Yeah.
that manicured lawn is a trap.
It's an illusion of productivity. The speakers in the discussion make it very clear they heavily prefer either the rugged, unpredictable isolation of the actual wilderness or highly focused, geometric indoor obsessions.
Exactly. One of the speakers details his own past addiction to competitive tournament pool.
Tool, like billiards.
Yeah. He describes living in New York and playing pool for 8 hours a day, traveling to underground tournaments, just fully hypnotized by the geometry and the physics of the table.
But here is the critical difference between pool and golf. You can walk into a pool hall, play intensely for 2 hours, scratch that competitive itch, and walk away.
You still have the rest of your day to work.
Exactly. You cannot do a quick, casual 18 holes of golf without sacrificing your entire daylight window.
Which brings us to the core thesis of this section, the absolute necessity of channeling your obsessive energy into the right creative outlet at the right time.
We see this beautifully illustrated in the personal journey of the actor from the sources, Luke Grimes.
Much like Taylor Sheridan's late-in-life bloom as a writer, Grimes didn't start playing live music until he was around 39 or 40 years old.
And the catalyst for him finally stepping up to the microphone is just so poignant.
It wasn't some calculated career move engineered by a slick Hollywood PR team.
No, it came purely out of grief. It happened after the passing of his father. And he shares that his father's dying advice to him was incredibly simple, but devastatingly clear.
If there's anything you want to do while you are here on this earth, just do it. Do not wait.
There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where close proximity to mortality instantly clarifies a person's priorities.
It burns away the fog of hesitation. In this case, it completely stripped away his fear of judgment.
He was already an established, successful actor. He loved writing songs in private. He loved the safety of the recording studio.
Yet he had never, ever wanted to be the vulnerable guy standing in front of the live microphone.
But with his father's final advice echoing in his head, he decided to look the fear in the eye, sign the record deal, and actually go out on a physical tour to sell the music to live human beings.
Which opens up this massive glaring contrast in the source material between two very different paths to artistic success in the modern era.
The traditional, heavily guarded Hollywood acting route versus the modern, independent, direct-to-consumer music route.
They highlight this incredible phenomenon by bringing up the musician Oliver Anthony.
Oh, wow. Oliver Anthony's story is essentially the absolute antithesis of the Hollywood machine.
Here is a guy who was working as a heavy equipment salesman. He goes out into a literal field with his acoustic guitar, sets up a microphone, and records a single raw song.
Rich men north of Richmond, right?
Exactly. He uploads it to YouTube, and it detonates culturally. It blows up overnight.
He completely bypassed every single traditional gatekeeper in the music industry. No A&R reps, no talent scouts, no focus groups.
And because he owned his talent and his distribution outright, he was allegedly in a position to turn down $7 million record deals from massive industry executives.
He simply didn't need them to validate his existence or distribute his art. Think about the power of that, turning down $7 million because you don't want to be owned.
And this is exactly where we need to dive into what the sources call the Velvet Prison of Los Angeles and the traditional acting world.
Now, before we unpack this, I want to be perfectly clear to you listening.
All right, this is important. Our sources in this discussion offer some very specific, pointed sociological observations about the culture of the entertainment industry.
Specifically regarding political and social conformity. As we walk through this, we are neutrally examining their perspective to understand the psychological environment they are describing.
We're not endorsing or taking a side on the political viewpoints themselves, right?
Yeah.
We're simply analyzing the structural dynamic of the industry as they experienced it.
Right, exactly. We're just looking at the mechanics of the town. So the sources describe Los Angeles as this incredibly unique ecosystem fueled almost entirely by desperation.
You have thousands upon thousands of people who leave their hometowns, leave their families, give up every shred of comfort, and move across the country purely to follow a dream.
Because they have sacrificed everything to be there, waiting tables and sleeping on couches, they need that dream to work out more than anything else in the world.
And because the art of acting requires you to be explicitly chosen by someone else, a casting agent, a director, a network executive, that underlying desperation makes people incredibly malleable.
That malleability is the key mechanism. The observation made in the source material is that this extreme power dynamic breeds a fierce groupthink mentality.
It operates on a sheer survival instinct. If your entire livelihood depends on a room full of executives liking you, you are going to subconsciously or consciously mold yourself to fit whatever ideology is dominant in that room.
The sources identify that dominant ideology in Hollywood as a progressive, left-wing political stance.
They argue that when you get into a situation where virtually everyone adopts the exact same politics, not necessarily out of deep personal conviction, but purely out of a desperate desire to appease their bosses.
And secure a job.
Right. It creates a heavily sanitized, fearful environment. You might get a nice paycheck, you might get your face on television, but you become locked in what they perfectly describe as a velvet prison.
It's comfortable, but you cannot leave, and as a result, you lose your artistic edge.
And when you lose that edge, when you constantly rely on the external validation of a casting director to tell you if you are good enough, it breeds the ultimate psychological parasite.
Impostor syndrome.
What's fascinating here is how universal this feeling of being a fraud is among sane, self-aware people.
The speakers joke that unless you are a wildly eccentric, perhaps slightly unhinged genius, and they specifically use Kanye West as the archetype here.
Someone who probably possesses absolutely zero imposter syndrome.
Literally everyone else feels it. It is a sign of a healthy, functioning ego to occasionally question your own competence.
Everyone feels it. But the argument is that it is uniquely heavy and suffocating in the world of acting. Think about the feedback loops.
In independent music, or in stand-up comedy, the feedback loop is instantaneous and undeniable.
You sing a song or you tell a joke, and the audience in the room either cheers or they stare at you in dead silence. It is a direct, unfiltered transaction.
In acting, the feedback is filtered through layers of corporate approval. You do a take, and then you wait to see if the director liked it, if the producer liked it, if the test audience liked it.
You're never really sure if you're genuinely good or if you just successfully pleased the boss.
Oh, I have to jump in here because I absolutely love how the source pushes back on this common misconception about acting.
The idea that it's just easy.
Yeah. People sit on their couches, watch a beautifully edited, emotionally resonant movie, and they think, I could do that. They're just talking like normal people. It's just pretending to be normal.
But the source paints this incredibly vivid, utterly absurd picture of what is actually happening on a television set.
Imagine you are an actor. Your job in this specific scene is to summon a deep, genuine, heartbreaking human emotion. You are trying to act completely natural and vulnerable.
Meanwhile, a guy with a giant beard and a harness is hovering a fuzzy boom microphone exactly 2 inches from your forehead.
Exactly. There are incredibly bright, hot lights burning into your retinas. There are tape marks on the floor that you have to hit perfectly so you stay in focus.
And just beyond the lens of the camera, there are 200 tired union crew members sipping lukewarm bad coffee.
Just staring at you, waiting for you to mess up your line so they have to reset the whole shot and delay their lunch break.
If you stumble over a word, you can physically feel 200 people internally groaning, "Oh, this guy is so unprofessional."
To manufacture a genuine, fragile human reality in that deeply artificial, high-pressure environment is a bizarre, deeply stressful skill.
It's an entirely unnatural environment. You're trying to synthesize reality inside a factory.
And this perfectly sets up the major thematic transition the sources make.
Because if the velvet prison of Hollywood is entirely about hiding behind fictional characters, hitting tape marks, and seeking corporate approval,
The desire to escape that prison leads creators directly to the absolute most raw, unfiltered, and terrifying feedback loop in existence.
which is live stand-up comedy and live music, the physical, undeniable, gut-wrenching reality of stage fright.
If Los Angeles is a prison built on other people's approval, the only way to break out is to find an environment where no one's approval matters but the audience sitting directly in front of you.
Which brings us deeply into the evolutionary roots of that terror and why failing spectacularly, what comedians call bombing, is not just a risk, but an absolute biological necessity for growth.
Let's go back to that opening hook we talked about. The actor, Luke Grimes, describes his very first live music show.
Right. He is 39 years old. He has been on massive television sets. He has been in movies.
He is in Billings, Montana. There are 1,200 people packed into the crowd at a venue called the Pub Station. He steps up to the microphone and his body completely betrays him.
His knees are physically shaking. His hands are trembling so hard he can barely hold the guitar pick.
And he literally blacks out. And to be clear, not from alcohol or substances. He blacks out from sheer, unadulterated nervous terror.
His brain simply stops recording memories to protect him from the trauma.
He plays the entire set in a fugue state, walks off the stage, and has to turn to the people around him and sincerely ask, "How was that? Did I do okay?"
Because he has zero independent memory of the event happening. The human nervous system's capacity to override our conscious mind is just incredible.
And what's wild about his specific journey is that by his fourth show ever, he wasn't playing small clubs anymore.
He was playing Stagecoach. Literally one of the biggest, most heavily attended country music festivals in the entire world.
The rapid escalation of pressure he subjected himself to is mind-boggling. But his initial reaction, that blackout terror in Billings, is completely validated and deeply analyzed by the comedian in the source material.
The comedian reveals a truth that sounds insane until you break it down. He states that he was significantly more scared the very first time he got on stage to tell jokes than he was the first time he stepped into a ring to physically fight another human being.
Wait, think about that for a second. Let that sink in. A trained fighter is saying that he was more scared to stand perfectly still and say words to strangers than he was to step onto a canvas and willingly take a punch to the face.
Why? How does that make any logical sense?
The sources bring up a brilliant theory from comedian Whitney Cummings that explains this bizarre phenomenon through the lens of evolutionary psychology.
It is a brilliant reframing of stage fright. Cummings posits that we have to look back at our Pleistocene ancestors.
In ancient tribal societies, early humans existed in very small, tight-knit, interdependent groups. If you were separated from your tribe, you died. You would starve or you would be eaten by predators.
Therefore, the absolute only time you would ever stand alone, physically separated from the rest of the tribe, with the entire group staring at you in dead silence, was if you were on trial.
You were being judged for a severe crime against the group.
And if the tribe didn't like what you had to say in your defense, you were going to be executed, or worse, exiled to the wilderness, which meant certain death.
Yes. You're standing there in the dirt going, "Guys, I swear I didn't steal the tomatoes. I'm a good guy."
Your deepest, oldest DNA is screaming at you that this 1,200-person crowd in Billings, Montana, is actually a tribal council preparing to kill you.
Your amygdala doesn't know what a microphone is. It just knows you are separated from the herd and being judged. There is no place to hide.
You can't hide behind a fictional character, you can't blame a bad director, and there is no backing track to drown out the silence. It's just you.
And when the tribe rejects you, when a comedian tells a joke and the crowd gives them nothing but hostile silence when they bomb, it is emotionally devastating because your body interprets it as a death sentence.
But that absolute devastation is framed by the sources not as something to be avoided, but as a crucial, non-negotiable tool for artistic and personal growth.
They compare it to a very specific, universal human pain that I think everyone listening can relate to.
They say bombing on stage is exactly like being a 17-year-old going through your very first devastating, heart-shattering breakup.
Oh man, do you remember that feeling? Your chest literally aches. You think your life is permanently over.
You think you will never find love again, you will never recover, and the world is ending.
But as the source astutely notes, that brutal teenage heartbreak is a mandatory requirement for building emotional resilience.
It forces a brutal, inescapable self-examination. When you get dumped at 17, you have to sit alone in your room and ask yourself the really hard, uncomfortable questions.
Why did this person get sick of me? Am I annoying? Am I too needy? Am I selfish?
What is fundamentally wrong with my behavior that caused this person to reject me?
That painful, obsessive emotional audit is exactly what prompts an individual to course correct, mature, and become a better partner in the future.
Exactly. And bombing does the exact same thing to an artist. When you go down in flames in front of a live crowd, when you walk off stage to the sound of crickets, your ego is completely destroyed.
But the good that comes from that destruction is undeniable. You never ever want to feel that specific burning shame again. So what do?
You go back to your hotel room. You force yourself to listen to the agonizing, cringe-inducing audio recording of your set.
And you aggressively refine your material. You trim the fat off the setup. You find stronger punchlines.
You realize the audience didn't hate you. They hated the inefficiency of your premise. You absolutely need the crushing loss to level up.
We actually saw this collective, addict-like need to perform, bomb, and refine play out on a massive macro scale recently.
The sources discuss the massive comedy boom that took place in Austin, Texas. We have to look at the mechanics of what caused that.
During the pandemic, Los Angeles implemented incredibly strict, long-lasting lockdowns. For a year and a half, stand-up comics were completely legally stripped of their stage time.
And comedians, as the sources describe them, operate exactly like addicts. They possess a compulsive biological need to get on stage, to feel that pressure, to test their ideas against the real-time feedback of the tribe.
Being deprived of that dopamine loop for 18 months was intolerable for them. So what happened?
A literal mass migration. You had 17 or 18 of the world's absolute elite, arena-touring, world-class, headlining comedians physically pack up their houses, uproot their families, and move to Austin, Texas.
Simply because the state was open and they could legally perform indoors, they created an unprecedented concentration of talent.
It drove an industry boom to the point where there are now 7 dedicated, world-class comedy clubs operating on a single street in Austin.
It was a modern gold rush, driven entirely by the biological need to face the tribe, get the laugh, and avoid the stifling velvet prison of LA.
And that compulsive drive to constantly refine the material brings up the actual gritty mechanics of human creativity. How do you actually make something funny out of thin air?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because people think the creative process is this ethereal, magical lightning strike.
It sounds almost spiritual, but
Right.
the reality is that it requires dense blue-collar labor.
The comedian in the source describes joke writing not as a sudden flash of genius while walking in the park, but as building a massive mountain, one incredibly thin layer of paint at a time.
He details his process. He will sit down at a computer and force himself to write 2,000 words of exploratory, rambly, often terrible thoughts about a single premise.
Say the premise is about the absurdities of air travel. He will explore every possible angle, every contrarian viewpoint, every weird observation.
And out of those 2,000 exhausting words, he might find one single, tightly constructed paragraph that actually contains a punchline.
It is a process of extreme distillation. You are panning for gold in a river of your own mediocre thoughts.
But the psychological mindset required to endure that labor day after day is what fascinates me. They reference Stephen Pressfield's famous book, The War of Art.
No, that's such a good book. The core idea is that you have to pay a daily homage to the muse.
You cannot just wait for inspiration to magically strike while you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. You have to treat it like a blue-collar job.
You have to sit at the keyboard, or stand with your guitar at the exact same time every single day, ready to work. Some days, you sit there for 3 hours and the muse gives you absolutely nothing.
But if you put in the reps, if you demonstrate to your subconscious that you are committed, eventually an idea drops into your brain that is so perfectly formed, so pristine, that you can't even take egoic credit for it.
It literally feels like it was gifted to you from the ether.
What you are describing is intellectual resilience. It is the hard-earned willingness to sit with the agonizing discomfort of a blank page or to stand in the stinging silence of an unamused audience until the pressure finally forms a diamond.
And if we take that abstract concept of intellectual and emotional resilience and apply it directly to the physical realm, where the consequences are no longer just bruised egos but broken bones, we transition perfectly into the next major theme of the discussion.
Because if stand-up comedy is high-stakes emotional survival, mixed martial arts is high-level problem-solving with dire, immediate physical consequences.
Let's trace the origins of this phenomenon as detailed in the sources. The UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, did not start as the polished, multi-billion-dollar global corporate juggernaut it is today.
Back in 1997, it was operating in the dark, grimy shadows of the sporting world.
The speaker in the discussion recalls flying on a tiny, rattling propeller plane to a random high school auditorium in Dothan, Alabama, just to commentate on UFC 12.
It's hard to remember now, but it was literally banned from mainstream cable. Politicians were actively trying to outlaw it.
You had to hunt for it on obscure satellite TV channels. And the speaker's peers back in Hollywood, the fancy producers and casting agents, looked at him like he was entirely throwing his life and career away.
They genuinely equated cage fighting to underground snuff films. They thought it was barbaric, a career-ending association.
But he saw it completely differently. He saw it as the ultimate, undeniable proving ground for human truth.
Think about it. For decades, kids argued on playgrounds, and martial artists argued in dojos. What is actually the best style? Is karate better than judo? Does a boxer beat a taekwondo master?
The early UFC was the very first time in modern history anyone actually locked a chain-link door and definitively answered the question.
And the definitive answer to that question was provided almost entirely by one single family, the Gracies.
To understand the mechanics of modern combat, the sources take us back in time to 1930s Brazil.
You have these rugged pioneers, Helio, Carlos, and Carlson Gracie. They were fighting in these massive, unregulated spectacles known as veio-tudo matches.
Which translates to anything goes. We are talking about no time limits, no padded gloves, bare knuckle, brutal survival on dirt floors.
And what the Gracies did in that crucible was revolutionary. They took traditional Japanese judo, which focused heavily on explosive throws and tosses, and they brutally distilled it down.
They realized that in a real fight with no rules, both people almost always end up on the ground. So they focused almost entirely on the ground game, utilizing leverage and chokeholds to force submissions.
They created Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And within that legendary, almost mythological family, there was a figure who stood head and shoulders above the rest, Rickson Gracie.
The sources describe him literally as the boogeyman of the family. He wasn't just a tough fighter, he was a full-blown mystic.
He practiced extreme yoga to increase his joint elasticity. He utilized bizarre, ancient diaphragmatic breathing techniques where he could literally suck his stomach completely up into his rib cage to massage his internal organs.
And control his heart rate.
Yeah.
And he was completely undefeated in hundreds of fights. The lore is that he would travel the world, host seminars for elite black belts of other striking-based disciplines,
and then spar with every single one of them back-to-back, tapping out world champions like they were helpless children.
But here is where we see the absolute strategic genius of the Gracie family. When they helped launch the very first UFC event in America to showcase their family's martial art to the rest of the world, they didn't send the boogeyman.
They didn't send Rickson, who was heavily muscled, terrifying, and physically intimidating.
No. They sent Royce Gracie. And if you look at footage of Royce from UFC 1, he was smaller, thinner, wearing a traditional D, and looked completely unassuming.
Why? Because they wanted to prove a scientific point beyond a shadow of a doubt. They wanted to prove that superior technique, physics, and leverage could conquer raw, hulking size and aggression.
If the small, skinny guy wins, the mechanics of the martial art are undeniable. And Royce went into that tournament and systematically choked out guys who were literally twice his size.
He used his legs to trap their necks, cutting off the carotid arteries, not crushing the windpipe, but elegantly stopping blood flow to the brain, putting giants to sleep.
It changed the entire world's understanding of human combat overnight.
And that legacy of technical perfection has birthed a modern era of combat athletes whose dedication is almost frightening to observe. The sources highlight Gordon Ryan, who is widely considered the greatest submission grappler to ever live.
Remember when we were talking about the golf time sink earlier, how you have to protect your time? Gordon Ryan is the ultimate manifestation of protected time.
He trains 365 days a year. No exceptions. No Christmas, no Thanksgiving, no beach vacations. Every single day of his life is dedicated to sweating on the mat.
And because of that terrifying obsession, he is so mathematically far ahead of his peers that he regularly engages in psychological warfare.
Before a major match against another world champion, he will literally write down on a piece of paper the exact, specific submission hold he is going to use to win. And he will hand that paper to the judges before stepping on the mat.
Then he goes out, actively ignores a dozen other easy opportunities to finish the fight, and physically manipulates his opponent's limbs until he locks in the exact move he predicted. It's absolute god-tier mastery.
And we see this same hyper-specialized, obsessive development happening in the striking arts as well. The sources discuss Vasyl Lomachenko, who is an absolute prodigy in the world of boxing.
His father, who is also his trainer, understood that boxing wasn't just about punching, it was about balance and rhythm. So he pulled Lomachenko completely out of boxing training for 2 entire years when he was young and forced him to do traditional Ukrainian dance.
I cannot get over that detail. 2 years of dance. Imagine being a tough kid wanting to fight and your dad makes you dance.
But look at the physiological result. By learning the extreme balance and rhythm of dance, he built neural pathways that translated into what they call matrix-like footwork in the boxing ring.
He creates angles of attack that shouldn't be physically possible, pivoting and slipping entirely around his opponents before their brains even register that he has moved.
And speaking of regional dominance forged by harsh environments, the sources point out the current terrifying wave of fighters coming out of Dagestan.
They already took over Olympic wrestling. They took over MMA with fighters like Khabib Nurmagomedov. And now, 22-year-old Dagestani kids are stepping into professional Muay Thai rings, a sport traditionally dominated by the Thais. And they are absolutely destroying established world champions.
They fight with a relentless hunger, a crushing top pressure, and a fluidity that is forged in a very tough, uncompromising mountainous part of the world.
But the physical preparation, the dancing, the wrestling, that is only half the battle. The sources delve deeply into the psychological warfare of fighting, using the prime era of Mike Tyson as the ultimate, terrifying case study.
Mike Tyson in the late 80s was an absolute force of nature, but he didn't build that bulletproof mindset alone. He was adopted at age 13 by the legendary eccentric trainer Cus D'Amato.
D'Amato wasn't just teaching a troubled kid how to throw a left hook. He was acting as a high-level sports psychologist and a literal hypnotist.
He would regularly hypnotize a 13-year-old Tyson, deeply programming his subconscious mind to view himself not as a boy, but as an emotionless destruction machine.
Furthermore, D'Amato and Tyson's manager immersed the young fighter in the deep history of the sport. They curated an incredible, exhaustive library of ancient, grainy boxing film.
Tyson wasn't just watching his contemporaries to learn their habits, he was studying fighters like Jack Johnson from the early 1900s.
He was absorbing the dark energy, the casual menace, and the arrogant, flat-footed posture of the old-school, bare-knuckle brawlers.
He internalized that violent history so deeply that he essentially became a demon when he stepped into the ring. The sources make a chilling observation.
Tyson frequently won his fights during the stare-down before the referee even rang the opening bell.
Opponents, massive, heavily trained professional heavyweights, would look across the ring into his dead, completely black eyes, and you could visibly see their souls leave their bodies on camera.
Their shoulders would slump. Their breathing would get shallow. They were psychologically defeated by his aura before a single physical punch was ever thrown. If we connect this intense psychological and physical stress to the bigger picture of daily human life, the sources present a profound philosophy behind why anyone would willingly engage in this kind of violence.
Think about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. At its core, it is essentially a controlled simulation of murder.
The underlying unspoken premise of a sparring session, what they call a roll, is this: I am trying to kill you, you're trying to kill me, and we tap out to acknowledge who successfully achieved the lethal position.
Exactly. Let's be real about what is happening. When a 200-pound guy is sitting on your chest, wrapping his forearm tightly around your throat, physically compressing your carotid arteries to cut off the blood supply to your brain, and you weakly tap your hand on the mat to make him stop,
You are literally saying, "Thank you for not killing me today. I yield my life to you."
it is the most intensely stressful, primal, claustrophobic situation a human being can possibly be in without actually dying.
And the brilliant philosophy here is that if you intentionally subject your nervous system to that extreme simulated death on a daily basis, the rest of your life magically becomes incredibly easy.
Suddenly, the stress of Hollywood fame, or receiving a passive-aggressive email from your boss, or dealing with a delayed flight at the airport feels completely insignificant.
You have effectively inoculated yourself against trivial modern anxiety by facing down simulated death.
And it is vital to note that it is never too late in life to seek out that inoculation. The sources share a truly remarkable anecdote about the late Anthony Bourdain.
The public thinks of Bourdain as the ultimate worldly traveler, the cynical writer, the brilliant chef smoking a cigarette in Paris. But what many don't know is that he didn't start training jiu-jitsu until he was 58 years old.
58 years old. The speaker in the text remembers meeting Bourdain before he started training, describing him affectionately but honestly as a doughy chef.
He wore a thumb ring, he liked to drink, and he had absolutely zero athletic background. But his wife introduced him to the sport, and Bourdain's famously addictive personality completely latched onto it.
He transformed his entire existence. He got incredibly shredded. He was training every single day, sometimes twice a day.
And the dedication was insane. Even when he was traveling the globe filming his grueling food show, he would actively seek out random, grimy martial arts gyms in foreign countries where he didn't even speak the language.
He would just walk onto the mat, point to himself, and willingly get strangled by regular working-class locals.
He took all of his obsessive, formerly self-destructive energy, the energy that fueled his past addictions, and successfully redirected it into a positive, immensely demanding physical discipline.
It is a beautiful testament to the fact that humans possess a deep, innate craving for difficult, genuine experiences to anchor themselves in reality.
But I do want to push back on something here. And the sources themselves make this incredibly clear, because it's very easy for a listener to hear all this talk of choking and fighting and think we are just glorifying meathead violence.
Oh, we are definitely not. The sources draw a massive, incredibly strict ethical line between the technical beauty of mixed martial arts and the absolute chaotic tragedy of street fighting.
Yes, the distinction is critical and cannot be overstated. The speaker explicitly warns against the illusion of street fights.
There is an entire gross subculture on social media right now dedicated to watching drunk, untrained people fight outside bars on 6th Street in Austin at 2 a.m., and it is horrifying to watch.
The source points out the brutal reality. In the real world, out on the pavement, someone gets punched in the jaw, their brain rattles against their skull, their knees instantly buckle, they fall backward like a felled tree, and they hit the back of their skull on the unforgiving concrete.
And they die right there in the gutter over a bruised ego because someone bumped their shoulder or looked at their girlfriend the wrong way.
One guy goes straight to the city morgue, and the other guy wakes up sober in a concrete cell facing manslaughter charges for the rest of his life. It is chaotic, it is evil, and it is profoundly stupid.
Conversely, organized MMA is described almost like a ballet. It is a beautiful agreement. Two highly trained athletes agree on a specific weight, they agree on a date, they undergo extensive medical testing, they step into a controlled environment with a referee ready to protect them, and they engage in a physical chess match.
It is high-level problem-solving with dire physical consequences. It is art, whereas street fighting is just tragic brawling.
And that pursuit of raw, unfiltered reality, the desire to escape the fake posturing, the bruised egos, and the artificial lighting of city nightlife to find something genuinely testing, leads directly to our final section.
Because when you strip away the concrete jungle entirely, when you leave the cage and the comedy club behind, you are left with the actual unforgiving reality of the wilderness.
Which is exactly what drives people completely out of the cities and into the jagged, freezing mountains of Montana. Let's talk about the intense physical brutality and the profound, almost religious spiritual reward of elk hunting.
The sources describe a level of physical preparation for mountain hunting that rivals, and often exceeds, the training camps of professional athletes.
The average person cannot just get off their comfortable couch, grab a rifle, and hike the Rockies. The speaker details his grueling, nauseating daily routine just to prepare his cardiovascular system to survive the extreme elevation and punishing terrain.
He talks about doing Tabata sprints on an Airdyne bike. Now, for those who don't know, Tabata is a high-intensity interval training protocol. You sprint at absolute maximum capacity for 20 seconds, literally pedaling until your lungs burn and you taste blood in the back of your throat. Then you rest for exactly 10 seconds and you repeat it.
It floods the body with lactic acid. He follows this by strapping on a heavy-weighted vest and doing hundreds of step-ups onto a box.
And you're putting yourself through all of this agonizing torture in your garage just to get your leg muscles to a point where they won't completely quit on you on day 3 of a hunt when you're carrying a pack up a 45-degree incline at 9,000 feet of elevation.
But it's not just the physical exertion that tests you. It's the environment itself actively trying to break you. You wake up in your tent at dawn, and it is 0 degrees outside. Frost is covering everything.
By the afternoon, you've hiked up the sunny side of a mountain, your blood is pumping, and it's 60 degrees. You have to constantly, meticulously manage your core temperature.
If you wear traditional cotton clothing, you sweat on the hike up. Then you sit still to glass down a valley, the wind hits you, the cotton freezes tight against your skin, your core temperature plummets, and you are suddenly in very serious danger of fatal hypothermia.
They talk about the absolute life-saving necessity of merino wool, these incredible organic fibers that naturally wick moisture and regulate temperature, keeping you alive in those violently shifting extremes.
But the elements, the cold, the elevation, that is only the passive danger of the wild. The active danger in places like Montana and Alaska brings us to one of the most viscerally terrifying segments of the source material. Grizzly bears.
Oh man, the grisly facts laid out in this discussion are the literal stuff of nightmares. We're not talking about a cute little black bear that gets spooked and runs up a tree when you bang some cooking pots together.
The sources discuss a specific documented grizzly bear killed in Alaska that weighed an incomprehensible 1,600 pounds. Think about that mass. That is the weight of a compact car, covered in thick fur and muscle, running at 35 miles per hour.
With claws shaped like curved hunting knives and a paw the exact size of a grown man's torso.
The biomechanics of these animals are staggering to contemplate. The speaker notes a terrifying reality about bear defense. If you are charged by a massive grizzly and you try to defend yourself with a standard 9mm handgun, the bullet will quite literally bounce off the sloped, incredibly dense bone structure of the bear's skull.
The skull is designed like a tank's armor to deflect blows from other bears. A 9mm won't even penetrate, it will just make the animal angrier.
And the most horrific reality they discuss is the difference between how predators kill. If you are attacked by a mountain lion, it is a surgical strike. The cat will generally go straight for the back of the neck to sever your spinal cord or crush your windpipe. It is terrifying, but it kills you relatively quickly.
A grizzly bear does not operate with that kind of efficiency. A bear does not care if you are dead before it starts eating. A bear will just pin you to the ground with its immense crushing weight, and it will start casually eating you alive, starting wherever it wants.
They compare it to the exact same indifferent way a bear sits on a riverbank, pins down a violently thrashing live salmon, and just rips chunks of flesh off of it.
It is a chilling, sobering thought, and the sources bring up for Herzog's devastating documentary, Grizzly Man, as the ultimate cultural cautionary tale about respecting that violence.
The film follows Timothy Treadwell, a man who spent years living unarmed among the bears in Alaska, projecting human emotions onto them, treating them almost as misunderstood friends.
But eventually, the wild reverted to its uncompromising nature. A bear attacked and ate him and his girlfriend. The audio recording of his final agonizing moments was captured because the lens cap was accidentally left on a running video camera.
The audio was reportedly so deeply psychically disturbing that Herzog, after listening to it once on camera, famously told the surviving owner to destroy the tape and never ever let anyone hear it.
It is the ultimate, brutal reminder that nature is not a sanitized Disney movie. It is an indifferent, violent, perfectly balanced ecosystem where you are simply part of the food chain.
Which naturally and kind of hilariously leads the conversation into the ultimate wilderness mystery, the cryptid tangent. We have to talk about Bigfoot.
It wouldn't be a true deep dive into the mysteries of the wild without touching on the unknown. But the sources don't just talk about blurry photos in the woods. They explore a fascinating anthropological theory that the Bigfoot legend might actually be rooted in a real historical creature, the Gigantopithecus.
This is where hard history meets campfire myth, and it is so cool. Back in the 1920s, a German anthropologist was wandering through a traditional Chinese apothecary, looking at the weird items for sale. He found these massive, fossilized primate teeth that the shop owner was selling as dragon bones to be ground up for medicine.
Scientists eventually tracked down where these teeth came from, found partial jaw bones, and realized that this was a real, documented animal. It was an 8 to 10 foot tall bipedal primate, essentially a giant, muscular orangutan that walked completely upright.
The theory posed by the speakers is that during the last ice age, when the Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America, these massive creatures migrated into the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest right alongside early Native American tribes. They coexisted.
Which perfectly explains why almost every single indigenous tribe in that region has their own distinct, ancient word for a wild, hairy man of the woods. They weren't making up monsters, they were describing their neighbors.
But the obvious question is, if they were real, why aren't they here now? Why do we only have grainy footage and footprints? Why don't we see them?
The sources link the extinction of this massive creature to a catastrophic geological event known as the Younger Dryas impact theory.
This theory is absolutely fascinating. The hypothesis is that roughly 11,800 years ago, a massive comet or fragments of a comet struck the Earth, hitting directly on the North American ice sheet.
This cosmic impact violently and instantly ended the Ice Age. It melted millions of tons of glacial ice in a matter of days, carving out the Great Lakes through catastrophic flash flooding and causing a massive extinction event.
It completely wiped out 65% of all megafauna in North America. We are talking about the sudden end of the woolly mammoths, the giant ground sloths, and the American lion, which was a terrifying predator, supposedly much larger than the modern African lion.
The speakers theorize that this sudden cosmic climate shift, which destroyed the massive forests and food supply, rather than early human hunters with tiny stone spears, is what ultimately starved and wiped out the Gigantopithecus. This raises an important question, and honestly, it forms the deep philosophical core of the entire discussion. Taking all of this into account, the bears, the mountains, the ancient history, the sources argue that modern humans have our perspective completely inverted.
We tend to view a camping trip into the pristine mountains as a novelty, a cute little weekend escape from the real world of the city.
But they argue vehemently that the mountains, the freezing rivers, the elk, the terrifying silence of the woods, that is the actual baseline reality of the human experience. We evolved in that dirt.
The concrete cities, the glowing screens, the endless noise of traffic, that is the bizarre, highly unnatural novelty experiment we've only been running for a tiny fraction of our history.
Yes. I love this point. They describe the smartphone and social media algorithms not as wonderful tools of global connection, but as a literal bridge to crazy.
Think about the math behind the algorithm. If you sit in your apartment alone for a week ordering delivery and you just scroll through your social media feed, the algorithm is mathematically designed by engineers to show you the absolute worst, most inflammatory behavior of humanity because outrage drives engagement.
If you stare at that screen long enough, you will genuinely start to believe the world is actively collapsing and everyone is fundamentally evil.
But as the speaker beautifully points out, if you just put the phone in a drawer, walk outside and go to the local grocery store or stand in line at the post office, you realize that 99% of people are perfectly fine.
They hold the door open for you. They smile at your kids. They say, "Excuse me." The physical, tangible world is largely functional and good. The digital world is a funhouse mirror specifically designed to reflect and amplify your deepest anxieties.
And this growing fear of a fully digitized, friction-free reality naturally extends to their discussion on the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence. The sources express a deep existential concern about AI generating derivative art, writing scripts, and composing music.
They have this great, hilarious, tongue-in-cheek moment where they declare the rock band Nickelback as the first AI music. And they aren't just hating on the band to be mean.
They explain that back in the day, Nickelback songs were so perfectly auto-tuned, so aggressively generic, and engineered right down the middle to hit every single commercial radio metric that it honestly sounded like a computer algorithm created it in a lab to sell beer.
But the terrifying part is that now literal machines are doing exactly that, but they can generate an entire album in 10 seconds.
But the sources draw a crucial defining line in the sand regarding what AI can actually achieve versus human art. An algorithm can instantly analyze millions of data points to generate a perfectly catchy pop melody or a visually pleasant landscape image.
But because an AI cannot feel pain, because it has no mortality, it will never be able to comprehend or appreciate the gritty human struggle that is required to create true, resonant art.
Exactly. An AI can never appreciate the context of the story the speaker tells about his 70-year-old neighbor in Montana. Listen to this. This guy is 70 years old. He's riding a heavy adventure motorcycle at 70 miles per hour down a rural highway, and a deer jumps out.
He hits the deer dead on. He completely wrecks. Now, a 70-year-old man hitting the solid asphalt at highway speeds should be a closed casket fatality.
But this guy is built like an absolute tank from a lifetime of hard labor. The impact kills the deer. The man sustains horrific road rash over his entire body. He limps home, spends exactly 3 weeks recovering in agony on his living room couch, and then he goes out, fixes the bike, and gets right back on the motorcycle.
An AI can perfectly calculate the physics of that crash mass times acceleration, but it can never, ever understand the grit, the stubbornness, and the raw, defiant human spirit it takes to brush off that kind of pain and simply keep living.
It is the friction of life, the pain, the recovery that makes the human experience meaningful. And the sources astutely point out how much of our modern psychological distress comes from either having that physical friction completely removed by convenience or having it replaced with artificial, exhausting digital friction like dating apps, email chains, and constant push notifications.
Which brings me to my absolute favorite analogy from the entire source material, the concept of the human rut.
The speaker is out in the mountains hunting, and he is observing the mating season of the elk, which biologists call the rut. During this specific 1-month window in November, the male elk completely lose their minds.
They wander out into the open, bugling loudly, fighting each other, completely vulnerable to predators, driven entirely by biological urges.
But the rest of the year, for the other 11 months, they don't care about mating at all. They just eat grass, sleep, and survive peacefully. And the speaker hilariously proposes a thought experiment. What if humans operated exactly like elk?
What if we only felt the overwhelming urge to mate, the desire to impress the opposite sex, the need to swipe endlessly on dating apps during a designated 1-month rut in November?
I love when you riff on this. It is a brilliant, absurd thought experiment when you genuinely quantify the amount of mental bandwidth, financial resources, and raw societal energy expended on romance, dating, fashion, and posturing year-round. The numbers are astronomical.
Right. Think about what society would look like. Imagine how much more productive we would be.
If we didn't care about impressing anyone, we would spend 11 months of the year curing terrible diseases, building incredible futuristic infrastructure, and making profound art completely undistracted by vanity.
And then, for 4 weeks in November, Wall Street shuts down, the government closes, everyone just locks their doors, acts completely insane to deal with their biology, and on December 1st, we all shake hands and go quietly back to work.
It's a funny joke, but it highlights a very real truth. It is utterly exhausting to be a human being constantly bombarded by both biological drives and digital stimuli 365 days a year without a break.
So what does this all mean?
If we step back and look at the vast arc of our entire discussion today, a very clear, cohesive philosophy emerges from these diverse sources.
We started with the impossible, desperate work ethic of Taylor Sheridan, grinding away to build a television empire because he absolutely refused to stay at the bottom of the barrel.
We looked at the sheer terror of standing on a comedy stage, blacking out from evolutionary fear, and realizing that bombing and destroying your ego is a necessary crucible for growth.
We examined the life-or-death physical chess match of the octagon, where the stress is so primal and high it acts as an inoculation, making the rest of your daily life feel easy.
And finally, we ended up in the humbling, terrifying scale of the Montana wilderness, facing down 1,600-pound predators, and recognizing that nature, not the city, is our true baseline.
The overarching lesson threading all of these stories together is the power of intentionality. The sources are telling you that in an increasingly artificial, frictionless, digitized world, you must actively and intentionally seek out difficult, genuine experiences to anchor your mind and body.
You have to choose your hard. Whether that hard is waking up early to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, hiking up a mountain in the freezing cold, learning to play a new instrument at 40 years old, or standing up to a microphone and risking total embarrassment.
If you don't choose your hard, the world will choose a much softer, more insidious suffering for you.
But this leaves us with a provocative thought to consider as we close, something the sources point toward but don't fully resolve, We've firmly established today that choosing hard things builds the physical and emotional resilience we need to survive.
But as AI and technology rapidly evolve with the explicit, stated goal of removing all friction, all struggle, and all discomfort from our daily lives, are we risking the evolutionary atrophy of the human spirit?
If that comfortable, sanitized velvet prison expands from the Hollywood studio system to encompass all of modern society, insulating us from every possible failure, every fear, and every cold wind, where will we go to find our wilderness?
It is something to seriously think about the next time you reflexively pick up your phone to scroll away your boredom.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and maybe, just maybe, put the phone down, leave the house, and go outside.